Welcome to Entrepreneurs, Executives, and Eccentrics, a podcast dedicated to the stories, strategies, and secrets of remarkable individuals. Join us as we engage in enlightening conversations with intriguing entrepreneurs, accomplished executives, and fascinating eccentrics, exploring their journeys, triumphs, and the unconventional wisdom that has shaped their success. In this episode, we talk with Ari Goldberg, founder and managing partner of RNMKR, an investor and entrepreneur focused on media, marketing, and business growth. We explore his path from New York nightlife to working with LeBron James's team and building his own investment firm. Ari explains how he evaluates companies, why execution drives results, and what he looks for in businesses with untapped potential.
Hello, Ari. Tell me who you are and what you do.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me. I'm Ari Goldberg. I'm the founder and managing partner of RNMKR. I'm an investor. I'm an entrepreneur. I love building businesses. My expertise, digital media marketing, a lot of background in sports and entertainment, and excited to get into it with you today.
Excellent. So let's kind of just go back. Where was that first dollar? Okay, well, first of all, is this a family business? Meaning, was your dad an entrepreneur, mom an entrepreneur, or is this just who Ari is? This is kind of how Ari's been. Like, where did you make that first dollar in your entire life that was generated from thin air? You know,
that's a great question. I love the way that you break it down. I do come from a family of entrepreneurs. I like to remind people that entrepreneur is a new word. We used to call them small business owners. So my grandparents on both sides, my parents, all own their own businesses. I never understood the idea of being an employee. I never have, or I did for a little bit. I wasn't very good at it. But yeah, I've always considered myself an entrepreneur, especially since we started using the word. In terms of the first dollar, I got to think about that one. But I will tell you that when we were little, I remember playing Monopoly all the time with my dad and just kind of falling in love with literally the game of making money, to the point where he used to quiz me on who the presidents were on the dollar bills. And at the age of 3, I knew every president that was on a dollar bill or a coin. So I think the money-making journey started early, if you will.
excellent. Okay, so where was that then? Where was that first taxable dollar then? Right, because there's always this kind of stuff that I know that I did in high school and college, which is untaxable, and then there was it was probably taxable, but it was a long time ago. And then there's that line in the sand. I've got a tax ID. I owe the stupid government money. And what was that first dollar? Where'd that come from? What business was that?
I'm going to muddle the dates, but I'll give you what I remember. The first one, which will probably make you and all the viewers laugh, is I was a teenage model. I didn't grow tall enough to be a real adult model, but I was a teenage model. And so that was probably my first government dollar. Other than that, I did the traditional camp counselor, babysitting, tennis instructor sort of thing when I was little as well.
Okay. So now fast forward, now it's the first business idea that you ever had that you actually executed. When did that start and what was that?
My sophomore year of college, when I transferred to NYU, I got caught up in the New York City nightlife scene. My cousin, who was actually the only person in New York I knew at the time, had a bunch of friends that were big promoters. They invited me to work with them. And for better or worse, that kind of set me on my path. So my first business was doing celebrity events, marketing, promotions, working a lot with Noah Tepperberg and Jason Strauss during the early Tao Group days.
Okay. And it's interesting. It sounds like it's marketing, but it's not marketing, right? Because I've been through kind of your entire profile, and I kept getting the feeling like if I were an investor or private equity, right? My thought process is that Ari knows how to make things either sell, desirable, or branded. Does that sound about like a 10,000-foot view in terms of correctness?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you kind of touched on, I don't come from a traditional finance investment background. I cut my teeth on the streets in New York City. And I like to say, I sell cool. That's what I do. The commodity, the product that I sell, it has different businesses, different models. But the real product I'm selling is cool, is lifestyle, is a certain, like you said, brand. So I think you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Okay, then what was your first big hit then? right? There's like what's because I could definitely I could think back to like, oh my God, this is gonna work. It's like that really weird feeling when I always like liken it to a shark in the water who smells a tiny little bit of blood in the water. It's very similar to kind of that first business, and you're like, oh my God, I can actually feed myself doing this, or I could actually this is gonna work. What was that? What was that idea? What was that business?
It happened so organically, and it's so funny to think about now that you're asking it. But literally, I was out with my cousin. I had just moved to New York City to go to NYU. His friends were taking us out. I was like, your friends are cool. Like, what do they do? He's like, they're club promoters. I was like, that's cool. What the fuck is that? He's like, well, they bring people in nightclubs and they get paid for it. And I was like, I don't know anybody, but I could do that. And within a week, I was doing my first party. Within probably a month, I started my first business. And within a year, I was probably making, six figures as a 19-year-old doing it.
And that is $1 billion to 19 years old, right? And maybe not. Wait, what year is this? Yeah, but what year is this?
This is circa 2001, 2002.
Okay, yeah. $100,000 could actually was a lot of money in
like $250,000 now, at least, right?
Yeah. But that you're exactly right. Due to inflation, like that kind of money needs to be like $250,000-$300,000 to like really kind of have the same feeling. But you're a teenage millionaire, right? Feeling anyway. And now you're off to the races. And then did you get that bug where you start seeing other businesses and opportunities, and how did that go exactly? Because I imagine you're meeting the right people.
Yeah, I think that my best friend, who's still my best friend today, was my business partner during those events. We made a decision early on that it was all about the relationships. We were going to leverage this opportunity to build our network. We were going to actually pass up some money that we could have made otherwise to really work with the right people like Noah and Jason and Kiki and Unique and the other guys that were so generous in mentoring us, that allowed us to work with them and really see New York City nightlife is a very, very exclusive club, no pun intended. And, what's magical about it is, unlike any other city in the world, in New York, having money isn't enough. In New York, you got to be cool too. And what makes New York special is, you have a billionaire next to a celebrity, next to a model, with the gays and the artists, and all of these people are what make New York City culture and New York City nightlife so special. And we were in the middle of that at a very young age. So, I learned how to host billionaires and celebrities at my table and interact with them and take care of them, make sure the right person got in, or if somebody cut their foot open or someone's birthday. It was what I call hand-to-hand combat. It was really some of the best on-the-job training I could imagine for someone young.
So years ago, I had a friend who had moved to New York, lived in the meatpacking district, and we were outside of some nightclub. I think it was 3 a.m. or something like that, and I was watching clearly well-heeled humans walk up to the front door and were just getting turned away. Right? I mean, they had the style, they had everything, that they just weren't making it in. And then I went in with my friend, and she literally just went, "Can we go in?" And he's like, "Yeah." It was just this weird like confidence that allowed her to just, well, she was also, really attractive, but she just could just do this, and people would just let her in anywhere. And it was that weird confidence and mix of style and a little bit of money too, right? They kind of put it all together. So, I'm also going through, obviously I'm going to have to bring up LeBron, right? I was just going through, let's talk about that. How in the hell did that happen?
It's a great story. I'll tell you the full version. You can cut me off whenever you've heard enough. But it actually goes back. Another story I'm happy to tell is really beyond the nightclub stuff, kind of really how I got my start. But my first job out of college while I was in grad school was heading up business development for Steve Stout and Jay-Z at Translation at their marketing firm. And through Stout, I was introduced to Maverick Carter, who's obviously LeBron's guy. Mav and I were put in touch by someone else that worked at Translation when I had left to launch a couple startups. And Mav was telling me what he was looking to build. At the time, it was called LRMR. LRMR then became Spring Hill and Clutch that Mav and Richie Paul run. But, as a young Jewish boy that always wanted to be a sports agent, there was no better dream or better example of how you can manifest your dreams than Maverick giving me the opportunity to come on with him and build LRMR and a business around LeBron, and work with Richie and work with Randy and all the guys. It was really special.
Let's talk about that. Let's drill in just a little bit. Okay, so what exactly was it LRMR? What exactly was that entity?
The initial vision was essentially to build our own version of CAA. It was an entity in which LeBron was not only the primary client, but also the partner that had started the business. And so it was a very unique model. A lot of what you see today in the empire that Mav and LeBron and Richie have built kind of stem from these origins. But those guys, and thankfully myself being able to be a part of it, we're really at the forefront of what we've seen with athletes and celebrities, the way they're managing their portfolios, the way they're making investments, how they're leveraging their brands. There would be no Tom Brady, Kim Kardashian, Mr. Beast if it hadn't been for what we did, for LeBron in those days. And it's a pretty fascinating case study that I'm sure Harvard Business School will write about soon if they haven't already.
Oh my God. Okay. So, because it's right. There's one thing having celebrity. There's another thing having the right, I guess, funding for that, right? But execution. It's, over the years, I get asked to sign an NDA, right? Probably 3 or 4 times a year. And your idea is not that special, I promise. It just isn't. It never is, right? Because execution, I could tell a million people exactly how to go make $1 million and no one will do it, right? Execution.
If you don't mind, I'll tell just 2 quick anecdotes about that because I couldn't agree more with you. The first is, which I'm sure we'll get to, the lead investor in my first few businesses was Dan Goldberg from Quicken Loans and the Cavs, who Mav introduced me to. One of Uncle Danny's isms is innovation is rewarded, but execution is worshipped. And I think that that's key. And then maybe the funnier story, I love telling this. I was at my office at Stylecaster years ago, and I had a gentleman came in. His name was Frank. I called him Uncle Frank. He was an older Jewish shmata industry guys. For those viewers that don't speak Yiddish, shmata is like the clothing business. A shmata is like a shirt. And he comes in and he had sort of like a B2B version of Stylecaster. My business Stylecaster was B2C, his was B2B. And I was like, Uncle Frank, I love you a lot, man. I really appreciate us talking, but I'm going to need you to sign an NDA. And he starts laughing and he's like, let me tell you something, Ari. Why don't you go out there? Why don't you buy yourself 500 planes and 1,000 trucks and call yourself UPS? And I was like, Uncle Frank, what the fuck are you talking about? And he goes, Ari, you can't build UPS. Only they can build UPS. You can buy as many planes and trucks as you want, but you can't do it. And I think to your point, especially in the early stage stuff, I mean, no investor in their right mind is signing an NDA. It really is kind of like an amateur move these days. But, the execution is what's worshipped. Our value prop is our ability to execute. Yes, we may have some innovative ideas, but as you mentioned, it's all about execution.
Yeah, it's like, go and tell me more about Grindr for cats and go and tell me more Facebook for post office workers or whatever lame ass bullshit you're gonna kind of sell to me along the way, right? And that is the problem. Like it's typically the simple ideas, right? I probably talk to, I don't know, probably 8 or 12 entrepreneurs per week, right? And it's the ideas like, oh yeah, well, what I do is I buy plumbing companies and I rebrand them and I make them more streamlined. And I did $300 million last year. And you're like, wait, what? Right? It's the simple, but it's also the modernization of like older industries or execution of such. It's the execution is absolutely everywhere. I love that you got your ass handed to you at that age because it really makes you go, oh, you're right. I could never be UPS, so I could never be whatever. It really comes down to the execution. Let's talk about that a bit more. Okay, so speaking of execution, what are you executing right now? If you're current, on Rainmaker.
So, over the last few years, really since we sold Stylecaster in 2014, I've been concepting my vision for an investment firm. And what I've always wanted to build with RNMKR is a private equity firm with the infrastructure of a media company. So kind of looking at that in reverse, our business setup looks like a media company. We have a tech team, a creative team, a content team, a growth hacker team, affiliate, influencer, the full digital media marketing stack. But our business model is that of a private equity firm. So the way that we make money is we're taking equity stakes in businesses, investing, starting, partnering with businesses, and actually being on the cap table. So it's a unique model. It's a little of best of both worlds kind of scenario. I've never seen it before. And so all of my time the last few years, along with some of our portfolio companies, has been dedicated to that. And the caliber and quality of people that we have around the table as partners right now is really special, and super excited about all the things that we're rolling out with the new platform.
Let's okay, wait, that's exciting. Okay, let me build in just a second. Okay, so when I'm assuming when you say cap table, you mean ownership, right? You own a piece of the company. You're not getting involved unless you've got skin in the game, right? And then what happens is you come to bear with all of you marshal your forces, right, in support of this new organization. Now, are you doing this once, twice, 12? How many times are you doing this per year? And like, what industry are you kind of concentrating in?
Good, all good questions, and I think, if I may, one of the things that I've been saying lately is kind of a little bit of an anecdote that I think paints the picture, which is to say, there was this moment during the Stylecaster days where I kind of had this epiphany where I walked into the office and I looked around. I was like, all right, I built this thing from $0 to $10 million a year in revenue. I've raised over $8 million from some great investors. We have 7 million people a month coming to our platforms. I got 55 wild Indians and a bunch of half-naked models running around here doing photo shoots. For all intents and purposes, I crushed it, right? But I was thinking to myself, I think I can do better. And what I realized in that moment is I actually wanted to build the exact same thing. I wanted to build that media company infrastructure. The difference was, instead of only pointing it and applying it to one business, I wanted to be able to apply it to 100 businesses. And then I would own somewhere between 10 and 100% of said businesses. And so that's really was the genesis of RNMKR, which is, I love the media company angle. I love the content creation, the branding, the marketing associated with it. Obviously, we all know, especially in today's day and age, all the power is in the media. That's why you see guys like Elon Musk buy Twitter, or you see guys like Jeff Bezos buy the Washington Post. Owning media and controlling messaging is super important. So I'm fascinated by that. But in terms of a business model, I didn't want to be the young entrepreneur anymore, just going all in on one thing. I wanted more of an investor mindset. I wanted a portfolio of companies, and I wanted to leverage my secret sauce, my ninja skill set, which is digital media and marketing.
So that was called an entrepreneur studio 10 years ago, right? Or whatever. Silicon Valley had a bunch of those.
Yeah.
And then, and I think the problem, what the hell was his name? It was Sean over. Yeah. The as I understand it, the problem is that there was no specialization and there was no kind of what you're doing. You're bringing all this other expertise to bear on different industries. This was just like grinder for cats. Let's go do that, right? you get the people together and they just go, and it just doesn't necessarily work. Whereas you're marshaling all the forces that you've had for years, right? To go come to bear on new businesses.
Yeah. And I think, the idea that you're referencing of like the venture studio, sometimes we refer to ourselves as a private equity studio. So I think that idea, like, kind of like an artist, Da Vinci or Mr. Brainwash, they have their studio, they have apprentices, we have COOs, and, we're rolling out ideas or taking interest in businesses. I think what really separates us is, in terms of the RNMKR platform, on one side of the equation, we're curating, aggregating, and mobilizing an investor database. On the other side, we're sourcing deal flow. Then we're passing it through our platform. So our group of investors can participate in these deals. And really, then it comes down to, as an investment firm, what's our mandate? What's our thesis? And I built RNMKR to be very opportunistic and a bit amorphous, to be honest. I mean, when you ask about things like what type of industry are we in, or what's our secret sauce, or what's our mandate, I think there's a couple things. I think in terms of mandate, the first thing that you mentioned is we got to be on the cap table. I'm not a mercenary. You can't hire us. We need to be owners of the business. The second thing is we need to be overseeing the digital media marketing. That's our expertise. We're either advising the founder and CEO, or we're actually putting fingers to keyboard. But that's our visibility and be able to share with our investors that we know something that somebody else doesn't. And then in terms of categories, we're pretty opportunistic. Like I said, we're pretty agnostic. We're usually looking for businesses that lack expertise in digital media marketing. If you and your friends just graduated from Stanford and you're all growth hackers, I'd love to help you, but I don't think you probably need me all that much. I'm typically looking for cash flow positive, profitable businesses in the lower middle market with great operators that don't understand how the internet works. Give me a hardware company that's been doing 5 million in revenue for the last 10 years and 2 million in EBITDA, and they don't have a website. I'm your guy. So usually though, I think really our sweet spot is probably consumer lifestyle tech. Those are the things that we tend to gravitate towards.
That's fascinating. That's because what you're describing is this like under the radar succeeding in spite of themselves, right? Because the idea is so strong or the execution is so strong that it was just, it kind of willed it into being, right? So with that said, what type of business will you not touch with a 10-foot pole? And I don't mean the obvious. I don't mean the illegal or the morally corrupt. I'm talking about, is there a business you're like, no, fuck no, I'm never going near that business? What is that?
It's funny that it's an interesting thought exercise that, almost on a daily basis I've been going through for years. The one that I can ever think of is outside of, there's already a team of growth hackers from Stanford that are involved in this business and, they don't need me, is restaurants. I don't really see enough scalability with a restaurant.
Right.
So, I'm looking for things where I can use the power of the internet. I always say with RNMKR, our grand thesis is proven business practices multiplied by the scale of the internet. So I want an operating business that's already doing all the fundamentals or some fundamentals that we can clean up. And then we can just take the power of the internet and social media and email and branding and make the thing go gangbusters. So that's typically what I'm looking for.
So it's interesting. Last week I interviewed the old CEO of Jimmy John's, right? He's the one who scaled it to like gazillions and bazillions and trillions of gazillions. And he could never imagine not doing restaurants. And literally, I'll send you when it goes live. I'll send it to you. If you look at his face, very similar to yours, when you describe a certain business, your face, you don't even have the ability to hide it, lights up. The old CEO Jimmy John's, his face, it literally looked like he would have walked in on Christmas Day every time he described walking into a restaurant and smelling the inefficiency and knowing that he could make this into a fortune, knowing this business had everything except the bad location or the bad management or this. He could see it a mile away, and he knew I could turn this around, almost every time. And it's just funny how you're diametrically opposed, right? That's probably because it's a scale issue and, right, maybe it's not a digital marketing business, but
yeah,
I guess, right?
I mean, my least favorite part of business is managing. So I'm looking for things where I don't require a lot of people. Obviously, restaurants, brick and mortar are pretty human capital intensive. So I don't necessarily love that. But I think in relation to the guy who started or was the CEO of Jimmy John's, when you think about something like that, it reminds me of a lot of where my thinking originated. And if you take a guy like Jay Schottenstein, who I was able to get closer to because of the relationship with Mav and LeBron, he's probably the greatest entrepreneur in America most people haven't heard of. But when you think about brands like American Eagle or 84 Lumber, True Value, he calls his formula. There's like one other guy on the planet that knows the formula, right? And when I heard about this concept that he has a methodology, I was like, I want a methodology, right? I want something that only I know. I want my own formula. And that's what I refer to as the RNMKR algorithm. And so basically what I've done over the years is I've created a step-by-step list for how I build media companies, right? How I build a brand, how I build a sales team, how I build an investor presentation. And I've templated out the whole thing so that when I see a deal that I like, we don't have to think. We can go in there and we kind of know the nuts and bolts of what we want to do.
It's just funny because I'm starting to, after doing, 100 bazillion of these episodes where all I do is talk to entrepreneurs, the sniff test is a methodology, right? That is their own, right? The guy that I was referencing, his name is Greg Majeski. Greg, if you're listening, please forgive me. Over at Crave Worthy Brands, and his thesis is they buy lock, stock, and barrel the whole brand, right? So if you're a pizza place or a Thai place or whatever, he goes in, he buys it of the three-legged stool of like location, price, and and type of quality of food. He'll look for one broken leg. Right. It's his repeatable process. And I've kind of heard this. You just said it. You found your methodology, and you just know that when you crank this thing, money falls out at the end of the slot machine, right? It's no longer slot machine because it's a certain deal. Right.
Yeah. I think, one of the inherent in the idea of scale, especially operational scale, is the idea of creating systems. And if you look at any of the great guys out there, they've created systems and they can jump into businesses and do it. And again, I would never touch a restaurant. This guy would only touch restaurants. So that's obviously not the common thread. The common thread is it seems that successful people in the business space have a system, and then they look for things that they can leverage their system for. And then they're kind of creating their mandate and their thesis around what their secret sauce is.
I know, but also, are you the guy that also went in there and you have your system and you're like, okay, I need 7 people, right? 2 of these people are going to be for this, 3 or that. You start to see the things either maybe you don't have or maybe execution. So like for you, maybe makes you unhappy because you can't scale it or whatever it is. You're just going in there and just kind of replacing little slots in your brain is what it sounds like in terms of the actual system.
Yeah, and I think even pursuant to that, part of the business model where we've really innovated with RNMKR as an investment firm is we come with the full digital media marketing stack. I don't need you to have a CMO. I don't need you to have 5 different agencies. I'm coming with the email guy. I'm coming with the AI guy. I'm coming with the social media guy. I'm coming with the branding guy. I'm coming with PR. I'm coming with influencers. We have a system. We have a team of partners that we like to execute with. And, most investment firms got a bunch of, dudes in ties that went to Wharton doing whatever the fuck they do. We're coming in with a SWAT team of digital media marketing domain experts. And my belief has always been, in terms of a problem statement, the biggest problem in business today is that every company needs to be a media and marketing machine, and they don't know how. And so I'm really just looking for businesses that know they need to be a media and marketing machine and don't know how, because I know how. So if they can make the widget and they can sell the widget and they can produce the widget, we can help market and sell the widget.
God, it sounds like a lot of fun. Because it's almost like you come in with like you're Superman, you can fly, right? You're like, oh, look at you who can't do fly. Oh, I can fly. I can do that for you. So, okay. So, I mean, are you now seeking these businesses out? I mean, are you actively? Okay, you are. And then you're probably getting a lot of handshakes and a lot of like whispers. You kind of follow up the stream. You're like, oh, when wanting to meet you, specifically or whatever. Is that how that goes exactly? How does that go?
Yeah, I think, listen, anytime that you go on the internet and say that you're an investor, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I just became an investor because I grew up. And, I know what it's like to be raising capital, whether you're raising your first $1 million for your startup or you're raising, the next $100 million for your hedge fund. Raising capital, I always say the hardest thing in business is to get someone to write a check, is to actually get someone to part with their money. And so I just want to be a resource for business owners, for CEOs, for fund managers, that when they need capital and they need digital media marketing expertise, I can be a partner to them. And I think that's really our value add as investors, is coming in with kind of a unique model, but really aligning our interests, not just with the operator, but also with the investors. So, what I'm more proud of right now, even, because again, I think that deal flow, if you will, as soon as you say you're an investor, you're going to get deal flow. The quality of it depends on your relationships and your reputation. But the other side of it, to me, that's so fascinating is the amount of investors, the amount of check writers, family offices that are speaking with us and seeking us out and being like, I kind of understand some of the words you guys are using, but a lot of it sounds new, and they're kind of getting a little bit of FOMO. And the interest that we're seeing from investors that want to invest in our deals is really awesome.
That's interesting because you know what you're doing. You're creating your own gravity. You think about it, right? You're a singularity that's kind of pulling in planets, and you're kind of eating moons and such, right? Let's talk about family offices just for a second. So what I missed about your business was that you're not necessarily the investor. You can be, but it's almost like you're pulling in outside money. You're hooking them up with some percentage. You're taking your percentage, because it sounds like you're running a fractional CMO business a little bit, right? Because you were coming in, you're like, this is great. It's a giant, machine that has no real marketing. And you're kind of stepping in there, and then you're like, hey, I'm going to pull in these 7 family offices for, $500,000 a piece. Very low, not low effort, but I had a low risk. You're really raising the money, taking your 15%, probably, I would imagine, right? And then executing. Does that sound about right?
It just, really, at this point, we operate on sort of a deal by deal basis or a fund by fund basis. In a lot of cases, we're writing the check, taking the lead. Most of the things that I'm excited about, I'm the first money in, because I want that sort of control. And I want to be able to not just look at the operator, but also look at the other investors and be like, I'm in this boat with you. We like to say, there's no atheist in a foxhole. So I'm in it with you. And then from there, we just kind of get creative. If it's A later stage business, the economics could be a little bit different, but we're always putting capital to work, our capital included. We're building investor groups that are going into deals. So we're very opportunistic. And, again, just kind of going down the line, I'm just very, very privileged that over the years, I've been exposed to such unbelievable deal makers. And if you think about someone like a Steve Greenberg at Allen and Company, who's probably one of the preeminent deal makers in the world, Steve's got a deal and he goes finds a buyer, he goes and finds a seller, and he's just a deal guy. And I think a lot of what I want to do on a go forward basis is I want to be a deal guy. You need money, I'll get you money. You got a business that we can ramp up, I want to ramp it up. You got something to sell, I can sell it. And so, we just really want to be, at the center. Like when we talk about the RNMKR platform, I always talk about, definition of platform starting with Uber. We're not the driver, we're not the passenger, we're just a platform. Right? We just facilitate that transaction. And in our case, we're facilitating transactions where, like we said, we're on the cap table and we're influencing the digital media marketing strategy and execution.
So my favorite PE guy is like if I had, if they had like I don't know, baseball cards, mine might most sought after would be this guy named Mike Maples Jr. over at Floodgate. You ever heard of him? He's just extraordinary. And he always talks about the PE and like the investor and the secret they has with the operator. And the secret is that they recognize there's value that no one else saw. Like you saw Twitter, you saw things that no one else saw, right? Now, are you come across those things? You're like, this is going to be huge, or it could be huge with the right marketing, right? You're in on a secret that maybe no one understands because they don't have the CMO brand or they don't have that marketing brand that you have. Now, can you drill into that just a little bit? You come across those kind of deal. Give me an example of a deal like that, if you can.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think as you talk about like private equity role models, I will 100% tell you that my spirit animal or hopefully mentor is a guy named Brad Jacobs from XPO. And so much so that even in our own presentation, I use his quote at the end where he says, the easiest way that I found to create tremendous wealth is to find businesses whose share price is undervalued and we can improve them and make them bigger businesses. And so a lot of, I grew up in the venture, early stage startup sort of scene, and the business model is just different. It took me a number of years to actually understand the model of venture, which was a total miss on my part. But, in the venture model, you're investing in 10 things. You're hoping that one becomes Uber and you're assuming that 2 will do okay and the other 7 are going to fail. Right? That's the venture model, right? In PE, you better return 98% of that thing or you lose your job. And so I think, like you said earlier, coming from a family of small business owners, if my parents didn't generate more revenue than it cost them, we didn't have a roof, right? And so I think similarly, the private equity model of building businesses methodically, looking for an edge, maybe seeking out 4 or 5x returns as opposed to 1,000x venture returns is much more aligned with what gets me excited.
Right. And I never understood that. Oh yeah, let's go find the next, some, lame ass ride sharing horse shit or whatever, right? Because it's a bazillion X on the end of it. But you know what? It also costs $100 million to get off the ground. I'd much rather own, 70% of this like $30 million business than 1% of this gazillion, this other business that it costs me $100 million to get into it,
Yeah. And I think that
sounds like you're kind of aligned there as well.
Totally aligned with you. And I think that we're seeing a lot of cultural and economic shift. There's like some weird like lagging indicator with like Harvard Business School students and what they're focused on. So it was like 20 years ago, everybody was going to be an investment banker. And then obviously that tanked, right? And then 10 years ago, everybody was going to be an entrepreneur and a founder. And then that tanked. Now the big thing is what they call entrepreneurship through acquisition. You don't have your own idea, go buy a small business, and then you can become the CEO, right? And so I think that, a lot of our generation was sold this bill of goods by venture capitalists that the only way to grow your business is to be a VC-backed company. First of all, only 2 or 3% maybe of businesses are venture-backed. Most are bootstrapped, friends and family, bank finance. 98% of them are. And then you got to start looking at the returns profile. I mean, I've been fascinated by this lately. If you look at what funds actually beat the S&P, it's like 3 of them. I don't even think Bill Ackman beats the S&P, but he's known as one of the great hedge fund managers of our time, right? What these guys really are is they're unbelievable fundraisers, right? And listen, some do have certain strategies. Some ultra high net worths and family offices do need to diversify in different sorts of things. And one guy is good at bonds, and one guy's good at international equities, and one guy's good at venture. That I understand. But in most cases, I think I saw something. I'll screw up the state. We can fact check it. But it's like the state of Minnesota, right? The state of Minnesota, like pension plan, has one employee, right? It's a guy that brings like a brown paper bag for lunch, and he literally just invests in S&P ETFs, and he beats everybody. They
I'm a
have
genius.
no cost, no fees, no overhead, and this guy has as good of a return, if not better, than everybody on the street. So, I'm very privileged. I have a beautiful, smart, way smarter than me girlfriend. And she's one of the top investment funds lawyers in the industry. And since we've been together, I've been exposed to so many of these things out there. And I'm always like, I can't believe these dudes get away with this. Like, they can't beat the S&P, which means that anybody with money can just park their money into the S&P or maybe even real estate, and they don't need to do anything else. Why are they even trying to do anything else? And so I think in our case, when I think about something like that, I'm really thinking about like, what's our edge? How can we maximize returns? What are the sorts of deals that can really set the forest on fire? And again, getting back to the methodology that Brad Jacobs and other great businessmen like Dan Gilbert and others utilize, it's like, let's go find a good asset. Let's find something where, we think that we have an edge. Let's go layer on our secret sauce and let's take that thing to the moon. And then I think you guys start thinking about return multiples. And in our case, you start returning 4 or 5x, you'll get money all day long. So that we want to play in more of a private equity space, even if it's with lower middle market companies.
The other Brad Pitt, who from Fight Club, over a long enough time period, it's like life is like I don't know, I mean the exact quote, but it's 100% fatal, right? Over a long enough time, and it's like, hey, yeah, that's very impressive. You got 4x, in 3 years in a row, but you got like negative 50 at on that fifth year. It's that like 20-year longevity. Right. It's the, you bet on a Twitter and made $1 billion, but you lost 5 billion on the next, dogs, so it's Brad Jacobs. Don't look into that guy. I'm going to see if he's available for a call.
I think just to that point, to put a fine point on it, especially for a lot of the younger listeners or even the small business owners or the people that are either thinking about raising money, venture money, have raised venture money, or are fascinated by it. My advice is go understand the business, go understand the economics, not just in venture, understand how a fund manager gets paid. When somebody talks about getting a 2 and 20, right, they're getting a 2% management fee and a 20% carried interest. The 2% management fee is 2% of the total money that they raise. The 20% carried interest is like 20% off the top of the profits. So that part most of these guys don't even get to. Right? They don't return that much money that they get to even take their 20%, which means that they're making their money on the management fees, which means that they're always raising money. And so like I saw something the other day that was fascinating, talking about, how is Adam Newman from WeWork still able to raise money? And Andreessen just stroked him a check for $300 million. And you and I, who watched the biopic, were like, who in their right mind would give this guy money? And then you realize that even Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, because they are fund managers, need to keep raising money, which means they also need to deploy money, which means there's only a few guys in the world that you can trust with like 300. And I'm not here to say you can trust Adam Newman, although I do think he did some innovative stuff. I'll just stay away from that one. But he is a known entity that has played with dollars that big. So you can make a case to give that guy $300 million, which means now you've deployed your fund, which means now you can go raise a new fund and get 2% on the next fund. And so I personally just don't really love that model. I don't like the idea of getting rich, sitting on someone else's or manage. I'm not a money manager. You know what I mean? I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a business builder. I build businesses and I bring innovation and I create value. And so a lot of the things that we're trying to do at RNMKR is really to address those issues for our investors to say, hey, when you work with us, we're not trying to get rich on sitting on your money. We're trying to get rich owning equity with you. We're a private equity operating company. We're to go in there, make these businesses better, create value, and then we all win together.
I think your thesis is valuable in that, as someone who, in the next 5 or 10 years may look for an exit, like when I look for a partner, right? I want to hear that. I don't want to hear, well, I'm going to get that too, right? On the money I raise. Right. That's really where they're making their money. They're not making the money on the execution portion of it. They're making their money on that kind of like hooking up A and B, convincing A that B is good. And then here's your 2% moving on. Well, they don't really have a dog in the fight. And that doesn't really sit awesome with me. All right, we're out of time. Thank you so much for doing this. I could talk to you for an hour. I don't know. I could do this for hours. Just stay on for like one more minute after we do this, but it was awesome doing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.